having the advantage of 10 years, not only of play and DMing, but also working on the game, this was our chance to see how we could make all the different parts of the game work even better together.
I have a mix of questions to ask you, ranging from little nuances to big picture questions. First question, backwards compatibility. We've talked about backwards compatibility basically since this whole thing was announced. Now that I had a chance to read through the player's handbook, I was curious, how do older races, what we call species, older species from that aren't being brought forward, and subclasses that don't appear in the player's handbook, how will those work with the new class and character building rules?
So the classes, subclasses, feats, species, backgrounds, and all the rest that you have in the new player's handbook, you can use with any of similar elements that appear in other books, as long as it's not the same thing. And here's what I mean by that. If a subclass appears in the 2024 rules and you're making a 2024 character, you can't use the 2014 version of that subclass. Same with feats, same with species, any other element that basically, as soon as it appears in its new form, that new form replaces the old form. But what that also means is if something doesn't appear in the 2024 Player's Handbook, you are welcome to pair it with a thing that does. So a great example of this. If you are playing a 2024 wizard and you want to use the Necromancer subclass from the 2014 Player's Handbook, you are welcome to do so. Again, that is true of anything, not just from the 2014 Player's Handbook, but books like Xanathar's Guide, Tasha's Cauldron. If it's a feat, subclass, species, or other character element that does not appear in the 2024 Player's Handbook, you can use it with the material that does. But again, anything that appears in the 2024 Player's Handbook replaces its older equivalent. And we're doing that largely so that we don't end up at tables with like two different versions of the same subclass. So part of that is not only do we want you to play with the new improved versions that are in 2024, but it's also about helping to make the play experience as smooth as possible around various game tables. There is specific guidance on using particularly species and backgrounds from older books. There's guidance on that in the new Player's Handbook in the chapter on character building. And we provided that guidance particularly because the game over the last decade has taken several different directions when it comes to ability score increases at first level. And so the Player's Handbook addresses that directly. And we've also worded all of the classes' subclass features so that when you get your subclass in a 2024 class, we worded the rules so that it gives you any features that you might, let's say you pick an older subclass that maybe had a different level progression. The new rules make it clear you get all of the features from the earlier levels. So we've got you covered in the 2024 PH.
That's perfect. Thank you. One of the things that has been like talked about in regarding the 2024 Player's Handbook and the entire 2024 rules revision has been the role of D&D Beyond. And obviously the landscape has changed a lot in the last 10 years, and D&D Beyond is now a very big part of the Dungeons and what Wizards of the Coast does with Dungeons and Dragons. Did you create content with D&D Beyond in the back of your mind at all, or was this as independent as what you did in 2014, with not really considering what role digital like digital compendiums, digital tools play within the rules themselves?
So we worked in consultation with our colleagues who work on D&D Beyond because we wanted to make sure that as the revised rules are implemented on D&D Beyond, that evolution of the game on D&D Beyond can be a fun and frictionless transition. But we also designed the books to stand on their own for traditional pen and paper play. So really, this is a case of both and. We did what we did more than a decade ago when we built the 2014 core books, which was make sure the books work on their own feet. But then we had the advantage this time of also getting to talk to our colleagues on D&D Beyond and see, is there anything that we can do in the design that will really make traditional tabletop play as well as D&D Beyond assisted play both even richer? So to me, it was even better because we got to address both sides of that play experience.
Can we talk a little bit about making some core class features into spells? We saw that with the Paladin. We saw how Hunter's Mark was incorporated kind of as a core class feature with the Ranger. Why did you decide to make some class features, and I'm really talking about Divine Smite as like the primary one, as a spell? But you know, I see that with like the Draconic Sorcerer too. Like there's key parts. Why did you make that change?
So with Divine Smite in particular, we realized very early on in 5th edition that frankly the Paladin was too powerful, and that excess of power was largely because of how open-ended the use of Divine Smite was. When we originally designed Divine Smite, it was under the hood basically a spell. I mean, you're spending a spell slot on it, and it was our idea of what if there was just sort of a really simple spell option for the Paladin who just wants to kick the crap out of things. And in the process, in a way, we kind of outwitted ourselves by making this spell not a spell. And that then planted the seed of and now the Paladin who has multiple attacks is smiting on every single one of the attacks. Now, we explored for the revised player's handbook several different avenues for getting Divine Smite where we wanted it to be. Through the Unearthed Arcana process, which involves, of course, consulting with thousands of fans who give us their feedback, we landed on just embracing the fact that under the hood, it was always a spell. And that ended up giving us a number of benefits. It really clarified how this magical effect functions alongside other magical effects. It was also a part of an effort on our part to improve all of the Smite spells, because we weren't just concerned about Divine Smite being overtuned. We were also concerned about the Paladin's class-specific Smite spells being undertuned. And so we did a holistic change because we wanted Paladins to feel like they actually had a range of cool options and not be in the position of the right choices always just to Divine Smite. We wanted Paladins to feel like, I have some cool tactical options. And yeah, sometimes the baseline Divine Smite is still going to be the best option, but there are going to be other times where the other Smite spells are ideal. Changing it over to a spell also under the hood resolved some potential multi-classing issues that used to be there. And so it solved many, many things while still remaining a very badass option for Paladins.
Okay. Is there a particular rule, so far, as we're talking, the D&D, previews have mostly focused on class options. There was one big video at the very beginning that was like, a massive hour and a half long video. But outside of that, we've mostly talked about class rules options. Is there a particular non-class rule that really hasn't been touched on in the previews that you're excited for players to get their hands on?
So we have talked about in some of the interviews I've done, and by the way, we shot video for 3 days, and I don't actually know when every single piece of that 3-day interview is coming out. But as a part of that, we've talked about the new tool rules, the new crafting rules, the fact that over 200 of the spells in the game have been significantly enhanced. And then our plan as we get closer to release is also to dig deeper into the rules glossary, because the rules glossary is filled with treasures that I think are going to make DMs and players' lives easier. For the first time in fifth edition's life, we now have sort of a unified rule for things like teleportation, for telepathy, for a number of common hazards that people face. I'm really looking forward to how having all of that clearly presented in one place is going to improve life at the game table for people.
Talking about the rules glossary, I was looking through it just before this interview, and exhaustion. You guys did a number on exhaustion. You really changed that. I just wanted to confirm this. This was mostly for me. Exhaustion no longer kills, does it?
So it can still kill you.
Okay.
Yeah. But what we wanted was a more unified sort of set of effects up until that point.
Okay.
Yeah, so it can definitely still be fatal. And it essentially works out to still having the same number of stages as before. But yeah, we wanted to simplify the effects, make it easier for DMs to actually be able to remember how the heck does this thing work?
Now I see, like, now that I've looked at it, now I see the sentence. It's kind of the watermark is a little bit over it, so I must have like missed it that way. So you do still die with exhaustion.
Yes.
But I want to say I really liked how that got changed with, now it reduces, it's a penalty. It's a cumulative penalty that just keeps increasing. There's a few things like that. Grappling's another one that, received an update. And like when I saw the grappling rules, I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Because grappling, grappling, counterspell, there's a few things that you just kind of like simplified. Was there a design direction that you took for some of these? When you're looking at updating them, was there like a specific thing that, kind of drove those updates beyond just wanting to update them?
Yeah, so as we reviewed every aspect of the game, we were always looking for several things. One, could we make it more fun? Which often means if a thing kind of bogs play down, we'd look for ways, how can we make it more streamlined? Because usually that means the fun is going to go up. We also look for, has this piece of the game been a pain point for people in the last 10 years? And if so, how can we turn it into something that people are going to be happy to use? And we were also looking at the interoperability of all of the rules together. We, having the advantage of 10 years, not only of play and DMing, but also working on the game, this was our chance to see how we could make all the different parts of the game work even better together. So a number of these changes in base rules are not just about making the base rule better, but it's also about, also benefiting classes, feats, species, magic items that rely on that element. And so there can really be this multiplicative effect. Here's a great example of that. You mentioned grappling, and one of the ways now that you can grapple is as a part of the redesigned unarmed strike. We wanted to make that sort of unarmed strike package a really easy to use and versatile game option for everybody. But we also specifically had characters like the monk in mind, because we have the monk in particular, but occasionally we'll have other effects that will allow you to, throw an unarmed strike into your combat mix. And we wanted to make that more tactically interesting so that you don't just have to clobber somebody. You also could instead grab them or shove them. And so that means every monk that before, when a feature was telling them they could make an unarmed strike, before their only option for that extra unarmed strike was to deal damage. Now, every single one of those things is now an option to deal damage, grapple, or shove. And so just that alone is a great example of that sort of multiplicative effect across the game.